you want me to just dive in and talk about it?
Yes, please.
All right. And it's a pleasure to see you, of course, and all of our fabulous viewers. So basically, I do think this is a big win for Donald Trump. Frankly, it was a win even before we got the decision today because the court took months and months to resolve this. And so even if they resolved it in a way that many of us thought they would, which is to say Trump didn't have immunity, the decision would occur so late that Trump couldn't effectively be tried before
Can I
the
just
November
interject real
election.
quickly,
Yeah.
Neil, just on your first point? Why did they take so long? Why did they put it off? Why was it so delayed? Was there anything nefarious going on there?
I don't think there's anything nefarious, but I do think that it had the result of giving Trump the win even before the decision came out. What the Chief Justice's opinion today says, kind of defensively, says, look, this was a major issue. The Court of Appeals rushed their judgments, and we're writing a decision for all time. And so we wanted to take our time and do it right. One wishes they had done it right, Katie, because it is a decision that is really an astounding one for someone like me who teaches constitutional law, or for frankly any American who understands our country is founded on the idea that no person is above the law. Because what the decision today does, just practically, is it changes the rules to make it much more difficult to prosecute someone who, as president, broke the criminal law. And basically, the kind of key move is to say there are official acts of a president and unofficial acts. And if they're unofficial, you can prosecute them. But if they're official, you can't. Okay, so far that sounds good. But what they say is an official act is so dangerous. They first say that there's a presumption that anything a president does is an official act. And then they go through and apply it to the allegations against Donald Trump when it comes to January 6th. And they start, and this is maybe the most dangerous thing in the opinion, they start by saying all of Trump's activity in terms of pressuring the Justice Department to try and impugn the November 2020 election results, to try and get, official letters saying the election had fraud and so on, all that's official acts and can't be prosecuted for that because it's Trump dealing with his Justice Department. Now, if that's an official act, it's kind of hard to see what isn't an official act.
Well, yeah, let's talk about what would be unofficial. Would not sort of calling for the protesters during the insurrection to stop for 3 hours, would that be considered an unofficial act? I mean, what are some of those things sorry, there's like a seaplane overhead. What are some of the things that would be unofficial, Neil?
The court says doesn't give us any examples of what's unofficial. They do say some things might be unofficial, Katie. So they say that exactly what you're talking about, Trump dealing with citizens about January 6th. Maybe that's unofficial. Or they say Trump's pressuring Vice President Pence to try and throw out the certification. Maybe that's unofficial. They say all of that has to go back to the trial court for what we call a remand, for a kind of evaluation of these things. But it takes place against the backdrop of two rules. The trial court's going to have to do it against the backdrop of two rules. Number one, there's a presumption that it's an official act, all this stuff we're talking about. And number two, you're not allowed to introduce any evidence of a president's motive in taking these actions to decide whether something is official or unofficial, which basically puts a huge thumb on the scale in favor of something being an official act. So the result, Katie, is this will go back to the trial court. The result for the January 6th case, and then we can talk about the result for our constitutional democracy. But for January 6th, it means that Judge Chutkan, the federal judge in DC, is now going to evaluate and ask the question you raised, which is the pressuring of citizens or the involvement of citizens or the 180-minute delay or the pressuring of Vice President Pence. Are those official acts or are they unofficial acts? And whatever the judge decides there, it'll undoubtedly be appealed again to the Court of Appeals and then perhaps to the Supreme Court.
So what do you think that judge will decide? Neil, do you have any insight into that?
Well, I think the decision's too new. It's got to be applied. I think that there's some pretty good arguments that whatever you think an unofficial act might be, what Trump did here qualifies. So I think that there's still some room left, but the fact is she'll make that determination. It'll go to the Court of Appeals. It'll get bogged down for another year at least. And the result is just more and more delay and Trump not facing
Well,
justice.
even if, well, first of all, what impact does this have on the classified documents case?
The same. So that, well, I shouldn't say the same. It should, Trump there took the documents. I think it's conceded after he left office. And so he wasn't president then. There might be some documents he might say were taken before, but I think that the documents are afterwards, in which case, he couldn't be acting as president because he was no longer in office. Even he, I think, has acknowledged the reality that he was not president on January 21st.
And even if the Supreme Court had said the president is not immune, how would that have changed things? Because the trial still wouldn't take place until after the election. Is that correct?
Yeah, generally. I mean, there was a way and a path forward for the trial to have taken place, but it was a tough one. So, in that sense, it didn't matter. But in the sense of, let's say, for example, Trump loses in November, he now faces a much more slimmed down indictment about January 6th than he would otherwise. So, that's one thing. The other is that there will be these proceedings before Judge Chutkan over the next months as to what's an official act and what is an unofficial act. And had, as I think most of us thought, the Supreme Court would accept the idea that pressuring your Justice Department to try and throw out election results is not an official act, had the Supreme Court said that, there could be evidence in that hearing, not before a jury, but evidence at least the American public could hear about what Trump did with respect to that on January 6th. Now that evidence may not be able to be admitted.
Did they say the opposite, that pressuring the Justice Department is an unofficial act, or have they not clarified
No,
that?
they clarified it in the opposite way. Pressuring the Justice Department, according to 6 justices on the United States Supreme Court, is an official act as to which the president can't be questioned by the criminal law.
That
And this is
does that not seem insane to you?
yes. I think that's the technical legal word, insane. And, Katie, what's disturbing is this is a decision written by 6 justices, all appointed by Republican presidents. The 3 justices in dissent, led by Justice Sotomayor, all appointed by Democratic presidents. Traditionally, the court tries to speak with one voice when it comes to matters like this. I think about, for example, Nixon versus United States, the Nixon tapes case, in which Nixon was discovered to have these tapes in the Oval Office that showed he committed crimes. That went to the Supreme Court. They decided it in a matter of weeks, not months, and unanimous or near unanimously said that including Republican-appointed justices, including justices that Nixon put on the court, they said, hey, we have one rule in this country. It's the rule of law. No person is above it. And Nixon's claim had to be rejected. Here, the Supreme Court has done the reverse. And if our viewers want to look at any one thing, I would just tell them to look at the beginning and end of Justice Sotomayor's dissent. A dissent is her written statement disagreeing with the majority opinion. And she begins by saying, look, today the majority of the Supreme Court gave Donald Trump all the immunity he wanted and then some. And at the end of the opinion, she goes on to say, if this is the rule, a president can order his political rival assassinated by Navy SEAL Team 6, and the criminal law won't reach it. In her very last line of the dissent, I've never seen anything like this in a Supreme Court opinion. She says, quote, with fear for our democracy, I dissent.
Well,
That's how strongly she felt.
let me ask you, how does this impact our constitutional democracy writ large?
Well, I think it means that if you have a president who is not as concerned with the law and more concerned with his personal ends, that the law, the Supreme Court, nothing is going to stand in its way. And so it raises the stakes even higher than we already knew how high they were, but for November, because it means that character matters, that constitutional disposition matters, that if you've got someone who's willing to push the envelope and break the law, nothing is going to prevent, unfortunately, in our system, that to be prevented, that to be stopped or remedied afterward.
Is there any hope that the lower court will be more specific about what's official and unofficial, or can they dissent with the Supreme Court's decision? In other words, could the lower court say, wait a second, asking your Justice Department to say the election was rigged is not official. That is not within the president's official,
No,
duties.
no. The lower court's bound on that particular question you're asking. So the Supreme Court's already adjudicated it. There's no, at least as I see it, and the decision's only been out for an hour, so I have to study it a little more, but I don't see any wiggle room for the lower court to say that. With respect to pressuring Pence, with respect to the other stuff Trump did on January 6th, those are still all jump balls and possible for the trial court to conclude that they are unofficial acts and something Trump could be prosecuted for. But all of that is going to take time, Katie, perhaps years. And in the interim, Trump will be getting away with, these grave allegations.
So what happens if Donald Trump is reelected? Will all this be null and void no matter what?
It will. And indeed, there's a footnote in the chief's opinion which says that a sitting president cannot be prosecuted. So it will be null and void for at least the time that Donald Trump is president. And indeed, I suspect what he would do as president is nullify his prosecution anyway and close it and order it, so it couldn't be revived after he left office. So he will, abuse the powers of the presidency to protect himself as he did before.
So I know you have to go, Neal, but do you agree with Sonia Sotomayor's dissent and her last line in that dissent?
I do. I think that, for anyone watching and concerned about our democracy, we've grown up in a world, my parents came to this country because of its commitment to the rule of law, to the idea that nobody was above the law, that there was one set of rules that applied to everyone. Here you've got a guy accused of, basically fomenting a coup, one of the most grave things that an American could do, let alone a sitting president. And you've got the Supreme Court today saying, yeah, well, it looks like you're immune for much of that, if not all of that. That if that is the state of our country, it is a very different one than we've had before, and it raises the stakes for November. It means who we put in the office matters, and who nominates the next set of Supreme Court justices really matters. I don't think we can continue down this tradition of 6-3 decisions that are so radically out of step with the American people, with the American people's traditions, and everything we expect for equal justice under the law, which is the words emblazoned on the Supreme Court on its marble facade.
And for people who might disagree with you, maybe lawyers who are conservative and Republican, how would they justify this decision,
Well,
Neal?
first of all, I think most conservative Republican lawyers do agree that the Supreme Court got it wrong today. Because, like I've taught constitutional law, Katie, 20 times, and every time I began my class with a quote from Richard Nixon, the only president to have ever said anything like this in an interview with, a journalist, Mr. Frost, in 1977. And I see the
Sorry,
seaplane again, no
sorry,
worries.
I've got these seaplanes. Sorry, go on.
Um,
I'm covering my mic, so hopefully people
oh,
can hear that. Go ahead,
Okay,
say that
so
again, Neal.
so what Nixon said was when the president does something, it's not illegal. And that has been a universally rejected theory of our Constitution from both Democrats and Republicans.
That's
I've got my
okay.
own. Okay, and so you've got this general principle that no person's above the law, presidents are just like everyone else, Republicans and Democrats alike believe that. And now you've got a Supreme Court saying the opposite. And I don't think it's possible to justify. I don't think that this decision will stand. I do think that, assuming our democracy continues, we will look back, historians will look back on this day as the Supreme Court getting it gravely, gravely wrong.
Well, it's a very discouraging, upsetting decision. Neal, thanks for
Okay,
doing this.
Okay,
Okay,
good.
thanks
Thank
everyone for
you. Bye-bye.
listening. Talk to you
Bye.
soon. Bye.